guys. Murderer's row of chefs here. So we've, welcome back. You have a good lunch? Yes. Nice, huh? We've talked a fair amount up here about the intersection or some intersections between policy and business. I want to talk about art and business. These three individuals are justly recognized by you, I hope, certainly by those of us who try and write about deliciousness, as true artists of the kitchen, people who are putting forth amazing food that reflects both their artistic impulses and a cultural moment. Jonathan, a number of cultural moments, right? I mean that with the, you know what I mean. Anyway, I've championed that my whole career, writing about what chefs do as art. And it occurs to me that it might be of great interest to this audience to know that really it's also about business. And this is something that is kind of hidden from us. Even those of us in this audience who are indeed business people, to go into a restaurant and experience a cultural moment and feel filled with love and admiration for the people who put the food out, they got to make a living. So I'd like to tease that out a little bit, and we see the dirty side of the kitchen, not in the sense of dirt, but in the sense of the P&L and how you have to face that. We've got three chefs here from different stages of their careers and different ownership positions or operator positions. But Jonathan, why don't we start with you, because you got a bunch of restaurants, you got to be responsible to a lot of people. And yet you're an artist. What gives?
Well, thank you. Pleasure to be here, by the way. I always think that Anita Lowe is the artist because she makes amazing food. And when I say that, there's a thing that Anita does, and I'll embarrass her right now. She does things better than anybody else does. Because I watched her cook one time, and I was looking at, how the hell does she do this? And it's that creative process that, as a chef, I was a musician for a long time, and I made that transition from being a musician to a chef. And the greatest thing about being a musician, especially a jazz musician, is to be able to improvise, be able to create, make new dishes, and essentially, and that's what chefs do. And Anita does an amazing job with that, and I'm always fascinated about how she could do it better than me, and I'm always thinking how I can get into her head. But I think that Sam and I talked about this before. I don't think most chefs know jack shit about money.
Okay.
I'll say
no. There was no shading to that.
Let's just cut to the chase. I remember back when I was in cooking school, there was never anything about how to make money. It was all about how to cook. Well, that makes sense. You go to cooking school, learn how to cook. Well, how do you go into a restaurant and make money and cook was the thing that I never understood. It took me 40 years to make money.
4-0.
4-0.
I'm sorry, JJ.
No, it's going to
take a while.
I learned from him.
So, and JJ and I talk about this all the time. So I think my job in life now is to tell people it shouldn't take 40 years. It could probably take about 40 minutes. You could figure it out. I think that the greatest thing for me for years was creating food, making great dishes, satisfying customers, making people come back in the door or leave with a happy face. I never understood about how to make money until I realized that my children were going to school, in college and high school, and they needed cash for education. I said, how the hell am I going to do this? I can't do it on a negative balance on my bank account, so I had to figure out how to make it work. And I just had a little epiphany one day.
So JJ, you're in an interesting position because in your two restaurants, you act as the chef and operator, but not as an owner. So you are responsible for making the money. And presumably the plan is that gives you the skill set to move on and make dough before your children arrive at college and need some money for the bursar.
Yes.
It is Jonathan's experience, does that hold true, or are you an outlier in thinking about the business side of things as a young chef?
I mean, Jonathan's right, it's artistry, so I cook food of the African diaspora. That's super heritage. I cooked in Ghana for a little bit, and be able to bring that back in the artistry moment in Harlem at the Cecil is gutsy, because nobody's ever had this style of cooking before. And you have all this money from owners that say, okay, this is what the budget's supposed to make. This is what you're supposed to do, but you might not do that all the time. And how do you stay true to the food that you cook and also make money? So yeah, being the chef.
So whoa. So what's so sweet alcoholic drinks that cost $22? Like how, I understand that pressure. In fact, I had a physical reaction to the need to I have my artistic dream, but I also have to meet this budget. Okay, guys, how do you do it?
First, you have to own it. And when I mean own it, you have to be there not every day, but you have to know where the cash flow's going. You have to know your cash position. You have to understand how many guests you're going to get in the door, how much money you're going to extract out of that guest, and the overall equation. And still staying true to yourself. For me, it's really staying true to the food of the African diaspora and of heritage and of my travels and expressing that, but also making money at the same time.
Anita?
Yeah, none of us ever gets into this to make a ton of money. It would be the stupidest thing in the whole world to do, you know. A 48-seat restaurant in the West Village, you're not going to make retirement. You're not going to, you do it because it's a passion and because you have to. I've always said that this industry chooses you, you don't choose it. Mm-hmm. That being said, I think in the beginning, when I first started out in this industry or first opened Annisa, I was interested in the business side. I thought it was like an interesting challenge, difficult as hell. Yeah, it's getting harder over the years,
We hear that it's getting harder over the years again and again, those of us who report on the restaurant scene in New York and elsewhere. And a chief reason for that is real estate. We hear about that all the time. Then we report a lot on chefs who lose their jobs, not owners, but executive chefs who lose their jobs. And then we hear the word then is not real estate, it's food costs. And it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, these are like two major issues in the lives of the modern restaurateur, at least in first tier and second tier cities. The food cost and the real estate cost. How do you balance it, Jonathan?
Well, I think I would add the payroll is the mitigating factor. Especially, listen, I'm all in favor of a living wage. I think everybody should be able to bring enough money home to feed their family, to be housed correctly, all that stuff. I'm totally in favor of that. But how do you balance it with a restaurant situation? For years, we kind of abused ourselves. I worked 18 hours a day for years. I was an idiot. If I calculated how much I paid myself, it was silly. So I think going back to the core thing, Sam, is the most important thing. When I was at Michael's in 1979, I was executive chef, and Michael and I were trying to figure out how to make money. We had to figure out this quotient of, what was your rent factor? Well, it's supposed to be 5% of gross. Okay, well, that sounds good. And then what was food cost? Well, food cost is supposed to be 30%. And then labor was supposed to be 35%. Where did these numbers come from? They were some sort of manna from heaven that were floating down on chefs to figure out how to do stuff. They're silly numbers. They don't make any sense. You have to reverse the whole process, actually. And that's what the epiphany that I had. I realized that, and big businesses know how to do this because they have gajillions of MBAs come around crunching numbers and bean counters that are crunching the numbers again, and then you have to be responsible to all the people out in the world that put money into these companies. But what really has to happen, and this is the crazy thing, you have to have a cash flow of 50 or 45%. In other words, your combined food and labor can't be more than 55%.
Or you'll be out of business next week.
Or you're dead. And so those are the new numbers. Because you throw in the rent, my rent is so ridiculous at Barbuto. I'm happy to be there. I'm happy people come. but it is so absurd, the amount of money I spent for rent. Sometimes I feel like I'm just working for the landlord.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if I can keep the 50% or the 55% and have creativity at the same time, I'm in great shape. But it doesn't come easy. It's really tough.
Right. So Anita, you've kept small.
Yes.
Right? You know, there have been some forays into, you know, there was the Bar-Q experiment, the rickshaw for a moment, but you seem very determined to have this be your atelier, your studio, the place where you're doing your work and providing the service in exchange for a market rate from the customer. How does that work with staffing? We talk to a lot of chefs who say, I gotta grow. You got to grow because I got to give jobs to these guys as they get better. It's part of career development and the like. How do you handle that?
I mean, it's difficult. It would have been great to promote people up the line. I mean, I promote people up the line within my little restaurant. But yeah, and hopefully they stay with me for, and I'm lucky I've had people that have stayed with me for a long time. But yeah, I can't turn them into executive chefs. I do have a chef de cuisine right now who's killing it. Mary Attia, she's brilliant. But aside from that, can I give them their own restaurants? No. Yeah, we've lost a lot of people to Danny Meyer. But it's so hard to find. Right now we have a serious lack of cooks in New York City because no one can afford to live here on that, and so everyone's leaving.
JJ, are you seeing that as well?
No, I mean, so you talk about marketplace, like being in Harlem, you're in a developmental stage, so the landlords want you to come in and you're able to negotiate your rent because they actually need the restaurants in the space to then put tenants in the building. So you have this leverage. For what I do is, being in a community, I'm able to reach into the community. I'm able to hire somebody that might have been working somewhere that just laid off 1,000 people and they really love to cook and they have minimal skills. And what we do is I help you develop because you can't get back into the market you were in. So most of my cooks are not classically trained and have not worked in restaurants. Now they can leave me and go knock on John's or Anita's door, but I really reach into the community, and I'm very grateful to have Harlem as a community with 90% of my kitchen from there, or Harlem and the Bronx.
So Jonathan, at this point, what is more satisfying to you, a dish perfected or year-over-year growth?
It's always the dish. It's always the customer, always. The look on people's face when they leave the door, and I get it all the time, you know, I had a wonderful time. That's everything for me. But then I have all the responsibility to my staff, my investors, and everything else to satisfy them on an economic sense. And
so does that mean that it's more satisfying to perfect the dish and to have the customer be happy, but it's more stressful? Like, you're not going to wake up.
I grew up in Berkeley, California. I'm sorry, you know, my whole, you know, socialistic background, you know, was I worked at Chez Panisse. Chez Panisse never makes money. I mean, they have to fund it every year. You know, there was never thought about making money. It was always about the art. It was always about the experience. It was about breaking bread with people you love. That's what it was all about. And that's what if that stops, then it's nothing. Then it's empty. Then you're just making money. You might as well, you might as well be doing anything. You know, and I feel the passion has to be there always.
JJ, what do you have to say about this socialist?
I mean, like, when you have great people underneath you, and if you're able to grow, then you're able to grow your company because you have great cooks, and they should be able to break bread and put out a quality dish at the next place that you do open, and they stay with you for a really long time. That's how I look at it. I think the food world in these next 10 years is going to be an industry where chefs are really going to be able to make money because everybody really wants food in front of them, and they fall in love with the chef like a superhero. They want the sauce. They want you on television. They want you in the restaurant. So if you're able to grow and also have the quality of the cook and the chef in your kitchen, or that killer chef de cuisine, then you're able to really break bread or have this quality of ingredient or your specialty grow through the country.
So but there are some perils to expansion, I would think. I mean, it depends on that killer chef de cuisine. It depends on a great general manager. It depends on a good ownership group. It depends on a million things. It depends on Danny Meyer not poaching half your front of house. I don't think it was half.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
But it's a lot. What are those perils, the perils of expansion?
Oh, failure. Oh, God. Yeah, I lost a lot of money on Bar Q. I opened a second restaurant right in 2008, right before Lehman Brothers fell. I mean, I made some mistakes, you know. But yeah, that was a huge loss. But it taught me to stay focused in what I do best, which is fine dining and and taking care of my little family.
Got it.
Yeah.
Jonathan?
Well, I think I've had more failures than most people. You know, you always learn from your mistakes, obviously. But I think one thing that I try to mentor everyone from the front of the house and the back of the house is that, you know, our industry, we're very economically challenged in terms of education. We don't understand how to read numbers. We don't know how to read P&Ls. We don't know how to, you know, go into a boardroom and negotiate a lease. We weren't. That's not our DNA. You know, that's a different side of the brain. And so, how do you force the creative brain to sort of think about all those things? And I think if you have to focus on it. So my chefs focus on food costs. You know, food costs is their mantra. But it should never get in the way of quality. Quality has to, and that's the hard part. It's that whole thing about my grandparents had a chicken ranch, and I was laughing about that whole, you know, that chicken that almost feeds itself and, you know, kills itself, you know, and goes to the market. But, you know, I think that, you know, that it's so difficult. I want my kids to go to the market every day, twice a day. I want them to go to the farmer's market and grab stuff and then sit around, throw it on the table, and what are we going to make today? That is the ultimate thing for me as a chef. Creativity, food at the peak of its season, and how do you get it to the table in the best fashion? That should be it. But unfortunately, the economics are boiling under our butts every day, and that's the hard part.
Right. I'm so intrigued by this because the keen sense of numbers that burbles along below the artistic desire is really interesting to me. And JJ, you seem to have it burbling quite well. At what point did you realize, hey, this is not simply about art or simply about executing this dish perfectly and making the customer smile?
Those weeks when you have those tough weeks in the restaurant and you got to figure out, okay, how do you pay light bill? How do you pay the gas? How do you do these things? So you kind of figure it out.
It's a farm.
Yeah. You kind of figure it out. The fly. You kind of figure it out along the way and you realize, for me, I think the most important person in the restaurant or in the restaurant group is your director of operations. The person that understands the cash position, the person that understands the P&L and really looks at that. And as a chef, as you grow, or you have a place, that's what you want. You want that person that knows where you're supposed to be at every moment, in every moment. And without that, I don't think you'll survive.
Anita, you got to give a piece of advice to a young baby chef, wants to open, got a tiny little place in Bushwick, has a great idea, really, really good with the chicken breast, like crazy good, like Waxman level. And that's the plan. Waxman level chicken breasts in a little place in Bushwick. What's the one piece of advice that you offer that baby chef?
Oh gosh, there's so many pieces of advice that, you know, and it's all so important. Like a restaurant is so many details. One piece of advice, you know, I have to tell you, I work for David Waltuck, and when I told him I wanted to open my own restaurant, he told me not to do it. And so now I tell my cooks not to do it. but when they actually do it, it proves to me that they had the passion to actually make it work, because that's what is necessary.
Jonathan, in your life, you've come across a few of these young acolytes, and indeed have mentored them. What do you start with? What is the lesson plan?
Well, everybody's so different, Sam. I mean, everybody. Let's take the person who was supposed to be here, Bobby Flay.
That guy with business?
Bobby. The first time I saw Bobby, I went to this restaurant on 3rd Avenue, and the woman wanted to introduce me to the chef, and I walked in the kitchen, and I said, well, there's a dishwasher, where's the chef? And Bobby came to me 2 weeks later and said, I want to come work with you. He was with me for 5 years. And that's what people have to understand. It took 5 years of Bobby being with me, going through all the gamut of the kitchens and learning all these skill sets before he felt he was ready to fly a little bit on his own. Mm-hmm. Okay? And when he flew a little bit on his own, he still felt that there was things to learn, things to pick up, things to absorb. And when he finally went out on his own, he was very lucky because he had the right person to do it with. And he's still with that person. It's really interesting. So he found a partnership that was really a marriage. You know, the economic portion, and you have the food portion. TV didn't hurt, of course, in that equation. But you have someone that you could bounce off all the stuff, the good things, the bad things. When you have your good days, your bad days, you have a counterpart to be able to do it. And I think that's what I always try to tell. Find someone that you could partner up with.
Find
somebody that you can trust.
Yeah.
And that's the hard. I think that's by far the hardest thing. Find somebody because you can't be there every day. You can't be responsible for everything. My GM of 10 years is here, Jen Davidson. I think she was 11 when she started with me. She is a hawk about money. When I say a hawk, I mean like she won't let anybody else touch the books. They're her books. She owns them. We never have mistakes. We never have mistakes because of her. Now, I'm lucky. I mean, she walked in the door as a ballerina wanting to be a hostess. And look what she's turned into, this amazing person. And she does a lot more than just the books, obviously. That, I think, is, I say, find that counterpart, because it's great to be a chef, but you have to do everything yourself. It's a pain in the you-know-what.
So it sounds like marriage advice, too. Maybe we should take a couple questions from you, because it's rare we get 3 great chefs with us in a small room this way. Yes, ma'am?
Sir.
Sorry. I was looking behind you, sir.
I want to make a comment on the subject of the panel of the fight between creativity, customer satisfaction, and making money. There is a solution, and that is to raise your price. You can do all 3 things at the same time. Now, that takes some courage, and the reason I want to make this comment, it's about Danny Meyer and the service charge, or the service added into the price. I'm sure there's a lot of people in the room who, when they see the prices at a Danny Meyer restaurant, say, geez, that's a very, very expensive place. But there's a reason for that.
So let's go to the service included.
Well, can I make a comment on that? Because I think,
absolutely.
Well, thank you, Barry. Barry Wine, of course, who has the most expensive restaurant in Manhattan in the 80s, but and knew how to charge money, and had the balls to do it. But I was in Australia recently, and in Sydney, the minimum wage is $21 per hour. It's a living wage, right? So you got waiters that work 3 days a week and live in Bondi, having a great time. Well, how does the economics work with that? Well, they raise the prices. An entree is $65 to $85. An appetizer is $40. Does anybody bat an eye? No, restaurants are packed. In fact, you can't even get into restaurants. And I'm not talking about, big places like Aria and Key and those really, gigantic, floating palaces. All the restaurants are full. So why does Sydney work?
But don't you think it's because the food is, the industry is respected there? The job as a server here is looked looked upon like it's not a real job.
I guess I'm not really talking about the service so much as I'm talking about it's the threshold of pain of the sticker price.
Right.
That the customer is not unhappy about, spending $120 a person
Without wine.
without wine. Exactly.
Right.
And going to restaurants on a continual basis. And I find it fascinating because it's obviously a much different environment, but why does it work there and we haven't figured that out here?
Now I'm on the grill. I think you answer.
Well, we went to no tipping in January because and people haven't understood it. I think people won't do the math. The media won't do the math.
The perception.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's perception. I mean, I
kill us.
have a very expensive. It looks expensive, but they're not going to do the math unless you weren't going to give a 20% tip. It's pretty much the same.
Right. So that perception, because I'm not convinced that it's the media's job to explain the math, because I think that how the market works is mysterious. You have that invisible hand that in Australia allows it to happen.
Right.
And here, we haven't reached a tipping point where it's so common that we don't bat an eye at it, right? There are plenty of restaurant operators who are saying like, I'm not going to do it, or let's see what happens. Let's see what happens to Danny. Let's see what happens to Anita, and maybe down the line we can go in that direction, or maybe we'll be forced in that direction by a rise in the minimum wage. But for sure, either way, it's going to create problems for artists trying to sell food, whether expensively or super expensively, in the streets of New York.
It's kind of like you can buy a cocktail in the West Village for $17. And when you go to the East Village, you don't want to pay more than $13 or $14. I talk to my friends that own restaurants like this all the time. I can't charge $18 for a cocktail in Harlem because the perception of the neighborhoods dictate what you can charge. And I would love to go to no tipping.
To what degree do you experiment with that?
I'm not sure anymore.
Or any of you. I mean, I'm interested in how you find a price point.
Well, it's funny, when I opened Barbuto in 2004, I didn't have anything over $19. And everybody got pissed off at me because I was basically undercutting everybody. Well, I didn't do it for that reason. I did it because I wanted to get people in the door. And I wanted to prove a point that I could have a great food cost and make money at that price point. Now, unfortunately, it's raised up because my rent
went up.
But if my rent hadn't gone up so much, I think I would still, I love that idea of the egalitarian restaurant where everybody can afford it on a daily basis. 100%. I think that brings in people.
That would be fun. A question over here? I'm not going to just, hi.
Hi. Question for you. One of the costs that you refer to a lot is your workforce, and, technology is disrupting every industry, including employees and the future of work. I have heard some experiments where some restaurants are putting in automation and robotics to take over some of those tasks like servers. It would definitely change the dining experience, but it would reduce your cost. I can tell your thoughts already, but would you consider that?
I just have to say that if there were robots at Annisa, that would be cool.
I think technology in the POS system or analytics on how we look at the business is helpful. Would I put a robot to serve or shake cocktails? No, because that's part of the experience. That's part of the flavor in that restaurant. I think on a different level of looking at something, I like to look at that Chick-fil-A model on how they take that one employee, give them the store, it's their store now, and they run it at the Chick-fil-A ultimate superb moment because they own it. And that's kind of your robot on that level.
Should we take one over here, and then we're going to have to wrap up? Oh, there we go.
Just a question on scalability. In most businesses, when you start to create something, you really make your money once you're able to scale it into multiple locations or otherwise. So do you find the same kind of returns on investment when you're able to scale to multiple restaurants? I think only one of you can answer that question.
I think two.
Well, I have 6 restaurants, 7 restaurants, 8 restaurants. And ROI is really a cute phrase, and scalability, I love all these things. They really, it sounds good on paper, but luck really is the big part of it. You got to make sure your magic can be spread around a little bit. And you can do everything in the world to, create that magic, but if it doesn't, you can't fertilize, you can't make it grow, you just die. So scalability sounds great to investors and on paper, but in reality, it really is difficult.
Magic is real. So I'd like to thank these guys for coming up here. Can you